will be the introduction to Geographic Information Systems, otherwise known as GIS, and then I'll pass over to Mads for more statistical analysis. My talk is going to be a brief look at what exactly is GIS, and then to talk you through the different levels of building a GIS map. So we'll look briefly at layers, adding data, vector data and raster data. I'm going to use a site which we're studying in the Res Farm project in India as my example for building this GIS map, and the visuals will all be looking at a package called ArcMap. And then finally, time allowing, I will present some data on the Thames catchment, so that's a river in the UK which has already been completed, and that's also looking at antibiotics in the riverine environment using mapping. So what is Geographic Information System, or GIS? So it's a very powerful system which does multiple things, but essentially allows you to connect data, georeference data, with a map. So it allows visualization of spatial data, but more than that, it allows you then to go on to look at patterns and relationships between those data in spatial context. And also you can look at it over time as well, so look at either trends or different distinct time points. So it allows you to understand the geographic context of your data. And then once you've done all your analysis, the other thing it's very good at is improving the communication of those results through very polished maps which are specific to your purposes. So it's very powerful and many different aspects to it. So another way of thinking about what geographic information systems do, so it's centered around your digital data, and it always needs a georeference, typically XY coordinates, but it can also have Z. So XY would maybe be your latitude, longitude. There are a variety of different coordinate systems which can be used. So it allows you to capture data, create data, display data, analyze data, manage your data, because within your GIS system, behind your maps, are geodatabases, and so your data can be linked in the same way as in any database. You can link tables, so once you're doing sampling and you're doing multiple different analyses, you would have one table, for instance, with your sampling data, and then multiple tables with your analytical data, which would then be linked, and you can access all of that through your mapping suite. You can store data and check data, and your typical outcomes, your maps and your statistics as well. So there are actually quite a large number of software packages. Some of them are quite general and some of them are really quite specific. Two of the main ones that are used are ArcGIS, and that's a comprehensive package. It's a software suite, and you can access that either online or a desktop version, which is the one which I use. The downsides to using ArcGIS, which is a very comprehensive and user-friendly package, is that it does need a license. So University of Warwick has a license for the desktop version, which is why I use it. The desktop version has limitations in that it's Windows only, so it won't operate on the native operating system of a Mac OS. So I currently won't run it on a virtual machine, but that's not actually going to be possible for long. So there are some limitations. There are other alternatives as well, and one of the main ones is an open source software and free called QGIS. I think that's Quantum GIS, and I think it's quite a similar package and with very similar functionality, and that operates on Windows, Mac OS, Linux and Android, so there are advantages to that as well. I'm going to be showing images using the ArcGIS, but you can achieve similar results with other packages as well. So the ArcGIS Desktop is a suite of software, and the packages are all integrated together. There are a number of different elements, but the key elements that, certainly the ones that I use particularly, are the ArcMap, where you're drawing your maps, adding your layers and adding your data and looking at the statistics. But behind that, the ArcCatalog stores your geodatabases, and that's where you would do your linkages and uploading your data and making sure that the georeferences are all included, etc. So on ArcMap, your maps are drawn in sequential layers using the data that you have stored in your ArcCatalog, and that's the next steps that I'm going to just go through in brief. So to introduce the area that I'm going to use to demonstrate the map drawing, it's a town called Bardi, which is an industrial town in the most northern area of India, Himachal Pradesh, and it's in the district of Solan within there. So just to zoom in on Himachal Pradesh, and you can see Bardi here, and the area we're going to be looking at in particular in these maps is the one in red. So the first thing that I'd like to show you is that the maps are built up in layers, and the layers that you can visualize on your map are shown on the left hand side of the ArcMap. I should say these are all screenshots from ArcMap. I've deliberately not shown you the polished reports that you might have at the end, because actually I think it's more useful to show you screenshots of the process. So I actually have a number of layers here, but I'll briefly say how you can add extra layers. The only one that's visible at the minute is the one with the tick here, and that's how you decide which layers are visible. And I currently have a base map, so a world topographic map, which you can download from online. And so you can see on here your typical features of rivers, district boundaries. This is the town of Bardi here. You can see also such things as this is a forested area, etc. And then if you do want to add data, then there are a number of different ways of doing this. So one is through this plus button up here, which has a drop down menu, and you can add data, either your own data, which if it has an XY coordinates through there, and you can also add from online, so that actually through ArcGIS, and I understand through QGIS as well, there is a huge online repository of data. And as with anything you get online, you do have to quality check it. A lot of it's open source, which is a fantastic resource, but you might need to quality check and tweak it appropriately, but it's a good starting point. And the other place for looking at data is the ArcCatalog on the right of my screen here. So you can access it either through the right of here, and you have a sort of a column at the right where you have, it looks very much like your Finder window, or you can open, if you want to do more detailed manipulations of your geodatabase, you might want to open the ArcCatalog program itself. So I'm going to talk through adding a few different sorts of data type. The main two types of data type are either vector, which is your coordinate based data type, so that's typically XY, but you might have an altitude, a Z factor as well. And as I mentioned earlier, there are different coordinate systems, and you have to make sure that your data is linked up with the appropriate coordinate system. For instance, if it's latitude, longitude, you would link it up as that. And within vector data, you have three main types. You have your point, so your individual XY data. You have your line, sometimes in ArcGIS called a polyline, which is a sequence of individual points which are linked together. And then you have your polygon, which is effectively a polyline where your beginning and end vector coordinates are the same, so you make a shape. In ArcGIS, and I think QGIS as well, the files that contain these data are all called shape files. The second sort of data type, which I'm not going to go into in much detail, but you need to be aware of, is raster data. And this is a matrix of cells, or pixels if you like, across your geographical space, arranged in columns and rows. And each of those small areas, the size of which can vary depending on your raster, reflects quality. So it could be, for instance, the digital elevation model, which we talked about in the first talk on Monday, is an example of a raster. And so you might have different heights which on your map are represented in different colours, for instance. Other examples are things such as weather data, so rainfall might be represented as a raster. Land use can be, or it can be reflected as polygons. So moving on to actually showing you adding some layers. First, I'm going to look at a couple of examples of points. You can see over here that another layer has been ticked, and just one dot to begin with to show you, and this is of relevance to AMR. One of the things that we're looking at in the Res Farm project is the impact of the common effluent treatment plant in Bardi on the river, so we'd be looking upstream and downstream of that. And so that treatment plant has been plotted here, and you can label your points. You can also change your symbols. All of these things are accessed through right-clicking on the name of your layer in your layers sheet, or for the symbols you can equally double-click on your symbols themselves, so the dot, for instance. Other point features that might be relevant to the analysis of AMR in the environment are, for instance, the presence of hospitals. And just to point out that the data for the CTP Bardi we've added ourselves, and I've not shown you them, but there's actually we also in a quite detailed manner mapped Bardi and the variety of different industrial places, etc. The OSM stands for Open Source Mapping, and is a resource I've downloaded online, and I've just highlighted the hospitals. You can also see such things as pharmacies, etc. as well. You can change your symbols as appropriate for what you're looking for. Within each of these layers, there's the data table called the attribute table, which you can again access through right or double clicking on the name. And this was the sort of thing that would pop up. So you have your shape code, the feature class, so you can see here that within the data set there's hospitals, pharmacies, chemists, etc. And more details regarding names and districts that things are in. Moving on to the second type of vector, your line or polyline, and an example of that which is relevant to studying of AMR is your rivers and your streams. And again, this is downloaded from open source mapping. They're not exact, so you do need to adjust them yourself for your own maps to make sure that they're accurate, but they're a good starting point. And for polygons, a couple of examples of polygons are, for instance, land use. So here in green is a polygon with the forest. Industrial units are in this sort of beigey yellow. Another example of a polygon is the districts or states, so the state of Himachal Pradesh, and there's also the district of Solan shown as well, with another layer. And the more observant of you might notice that actually all of my other layers only show data within the district of Himachal Pradesh, and that's because my computer's super old and didn't like running multiple layers of data from across India. So one of the things that you can do with your data is clip it to one layer to the elements within another layer. So I clipped all of my data to be within Himachal Pradesh. And then actually, if I'm honest, I regretted it slightly later, but that aside, I think it demonstrates it quite well. So for the raster data, I haven't actually plotted any myself, but I've pulled out from the literature, which is referenced here, a digital elevation model of India with the different colours representing the elevation. And you can use this on a smaller scale, and it's particularly useful for defining such things as water basins for water catchment areas. So that's the whistle-stop tour of how to add data to a map. If you're interested in doing this, I could recommend some of the tutorials that ArcMap have. There's one on Rondonia in the Amazon rainforest, which walks you through all of these steps, including going on further to do some geostatistics on the data and then produce some images which would be suitable for publications, etc. And I think it's really worth, if you are starting out, going through a few of these tutorials to really get to grips with it. So there's quite a lot of different elements to use in the GIS. And for the last few minutes, I want to talk about some examples of analysis which have been done using geostatistical, the geographic information systems. And that's coming back to the UK, again looking at antibiotics and the fate in the environment, and that's in the Thames catchment. And if you're interested further in this data, it's been published on bioRxiv. I've been involved in this project, but it was James Delaney at Warwick and Holly Tipper at CEH, Oxford, UK, who did the mapping and analysis. So these are maps from the Thames catchment, and the sampling sites. So first of all, looking at the map over here, so this is the UK, and the Thames catchment is shown in green, which is enlarged here. And you can see the river system, and here on the map you have your lines, which are the rivers, the polylines, and they've been coloured in differently for the different tributaries of the Thames. Just to point out, you've also got your polygon showing your drainage basin, and you've also got the sites of sampling in green dots and red dots. And the difference between the green dots and the red dots are that the type of analyses that were done on them. So it's the green dots that I'm going to be going on to look at. They had the more detailed analysis, including the metagenome analysis. And then on the right hand side of the screen, we also looked at antibiotic levels in all of these sites, and I'm just picking out a couple of them here. Trimethoprim and a sulfonamide here showed significantly different levels, both between sites and between the seasons of sampling as well, with trimethoprim being particularly high in a number of sites such as Ray 4 and Ray 6, and almost always being higher in the winter as well. So the weather in the UK is quite different from that in India. So we're observing quite different patterns in India, where you have the monsoon season versus the dry season. In the UK, we always have rain, but in the winter we have more rain, and that impacts considerably on the riverine system, in particular because the wastewater treatment plants can't cope with all the capacity of rain, and effluent is released, which is untreated, which does affect what's happening in the river, and that is more likely, not only happens, but it's more likely to happen in the winter. Other things that you can analyse are the land use, and so here again you've got your tributary map in the Thames catchment area, and these are the boxes which are amplified out, if you like, and you can see that the land use with the key here changes. So up here, for instance, it's largely improved grassland in pink. In the Ray 2, it's very suburban and urban, with the suburban in blue and the urban in green. Whereas Lambourne 3, for instance, has a lot of arable and horticulture as well as some grassland. And Cut 3 is quite mixed with improved grassland and suburban and urban. You can also do distance correlations. Wastewater treatment plants are of particular relevance, but also things such as fish farms, other farms where you might be having runoff into the rivers are also of relevance, and you can do geostatistics using your geomapping. Here we looked at the trimethoprim concentration at each site versus the distance from wastewater treatment plants. So these values were log transformed. It's non-parametric, so a Spearman's rank correlation has been performed, and there's a negative correlation, as you can see here, which is significant, with distance from wastewater treatment plant. And if you look in a little bit more detail, it's not just distance from wastewater treatment plant, but it's also the type of wastewater treatment plant. So the tertiary wastewater treatment plants were closer to the sites with the highest levels of trimethoprim, whereas those which had lower levels had secondary wastewater treatment plants. Coming back to the land use correlation, and here focusing on the 4 sites with the highest trimethoprim levels versus the sites with the lowest trimethoprim levels, they showed quite different uses in land use. And the most striking one is the increase in the urban and suburban in the blue, in the sites with high trimethoprim levels. So in the low ones, there was considerably more arable. The pasture stayed reasonably constant, as did the woodland. So it shows that the urbanisation is correlating with the high trimethoprim levels, and the urbanisation is also correlating with the tertiary wastewater treatment plants, and I'm not showing this data, but also the higher population equivalents as well. So to conclude, GIS systems offer a very powerful and flexible and very visual way of exploring georeference data. And hopefully I've provided a flavour of the different steps needed to create a map in GIS software. What I haven't really looked at due to time constraints are ways to present the finished maps in a polished manner, but that's also a really important aspect of the package for producing publication quality or presentation quality images. And then used some data that's been analysed using such methods to show you the sorts of analysis that can be performed in this particular field of antibiotic fate in the environment. Though I'm always aware that it's always the tip of the iceberg, and everybody has different interests, and there are many different ways to use these packages. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the second part of this talk, which looks in more detail at spatial interpolation. So that remains just a couple of thanks. So Liz Wellington and group, particularly Chiara Borsetto and the rest of the wider Res Farm project. And then it's important to thank James Delaney and Holly Tipper and all the other contributors to the Thames project as well, and also to all of you for your attention.